All right. All right. So, hello, good evening, and I'm so happy to see all of you. We are now in the evening of our Saturday. I guess I can't really call it the second day because we've been doing this stuff since Monday, but
Monday.
the Saturday day of our 2022 10th anniversary Coastal Magic Convention. We are now going to talk to some amazing authors about YA books, young adult, that seems to not make any difference if you are a young adult in order to read it, because everybody tends to love them regardless. And so we'll talk about that. And I'm going to have our authors explain or tell us who they are and what they write. If you have any questions or comments, if you're watching this either live now or in the future on replay, you can leave your questions and comments underneath the video. And we will, if you're asking during the live, I'm going to be watching. I swear that I am paying attention to the people on the panel, but I will be watching off to the side here just a tad bit so that I can see the questions and comments as they come in during the panel. And we'll get to as many of those as I see. Hopefully I will see all of them. And then we'll make sure that we get to those for you. I'm going to check and see if we've got anything to start while our panelists introduce themselves. So why don't we start with Sarah and we'll work our way around.
Hi, I write young adult, Sarah Nicholas. I write in a couple different subgenres. I am also a literary agent who represents young adult books, and I write for Book Riot, mainly covering young adult, romance, science fiction, fantasy, and audiobooks.
Awesome. Susan?
Hi, everyone. I'm Essie Smith. I write the Dust series, which is actually won the Bookshelf Wishing Award for the UK gold medal. And I also write the Breaking Free series, which came up first place behind us in the same thing. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm a New York Times, USA Today bestselling author.
Nice. And David?
So I'm David R Slayton. I'm the author of the Adam Viner novels. The first one is White Trash Warlock. The second one is Trailer Park Trickster. The third one is Deadbeat Druid and will be out in October. They are adult urban fantasy, though I do get a lot of new adult and some YA readers. Though recently at a book event, I did have a kid. He's like, "I like this." I'm like, "How old are you?" He's like, "I'm 10. I'm like, no, not without your mom. I did not want that email. But they did have a mom come with her 12-year-old, and he was interested. And I told her these are what I consider content warnings, and she said, "Oh, that's great. Yes, sign us up." So I do get some YA readers. I also just sold my first epic fantasy and a gay geeky rom-com, and also a spinoff to the Adam series, which is going to be a little closer to the new adult range. So.
Fantastic. I love it. I love it. Okay, so let's start off with an easy one. Super easy question. Well, I think it is anyway. What is it that you think YA stories have that make them so widely and universally kind of attractive to readers? It doesn't have, you don't have to be a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old to like a YA book. We have people that will read YA from the time they're 10, as evidenced by David's convention goers, till they're 100. So what is it about YA books that make it to where everybody just loves to read YA? Anybody who has an idea can start.
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay.
They have tight pacing. Honestly, that's a big one for a lot of people. They have usually generally tighter pacing than adult novels of comparable genres. They have characters who don't have a lifetime worth of emotional baggage, which can be nice, especially if you are, in the middle of a pandemic and World War III and, all this stuff. And I mean, they're fun. They're just like, they're written to be fun. There are, of course, serious YA books as well, and there are serious moments, even in the fun ones. But by and large, they're fun. And also YA tends to lead the industry in terms of representation and diversity as well.
Very cool. Very cool.
I
Susan?
agree. And I think something else is that the readers can relate to the characters. They can relate to the situations a lot of times that the characters are going through. You know, even in my Breaking Free series, you know, I'm dealing with a dysfunctional family. I'm dealing with a mom who's got a subscription drug addiction, a grandfather that Michaela didn't even know about, she didn't remember. And then, you know, dealing with first love and school bullies and leaving her friends and, you know, all of those life challenges that we've all faced as a teenager, feeling like we don't fit in and overcoming that and finding new friendships, finding our own way in life and a direction in which we want to go. And in my Dust series, even though it's a fantasy series with lots of action and, you know, a paranormal flair to it, the thing is that it's about that friendship. It's about finding people and creating your own family group.
Right.
And, you know, I've got a best friend that I've had since I was 13. Yeah, I moved from a big city to a little bitty town, and, you know, her and I connected. And, you know, 40 years later, we're still best friends.
Right.
So I think that's one of the elements in the YA. And some of my favorite books that I like to read are the books that my dad read to me when I was a kid.
Gotcha.
You know, I still go back to those.
Cool.
I think like a lot of what Sarah said was what resonates with me is the pacing. They're shorter. They tend to be more accessible. Like I love epic fantasy, but I'm generally not down for an 800 word, you know, brick. You know, I've got a busy life. I love a young adult fantasy because it's more accessible. It's more quick. That's what I like. I like fantasy. That's what I write is fantasy and be, you know, 100,000 word range. So you're not going to be with it for weeks and weeks. And some people love that. And that's, you know, again, you like what you like.
Mhm.
But for me, the biggest thing is the diversity, what Sarah said, of YA in the last decade has led the charge in diverse characters and representation and being able to see people like myself on the page. I wrote White Trash Warlock because I couldn't find a traditionally published urban fantasy with a gay male lead. I just couldn't find one. And then Katie Edwards came out with one, thank goodness. And then I'm behind, you know, and then I came out with mine. But other than that, the representation just largely isn't there. And YA has, and you know, what we're seeing right now with the desire to ban young adult books and to remove young adult books from libraries and schools, that just breaks my heart because these books that are available to this readership now are the books that I just would have killed for to have back in Guthrie, right? It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this awesome diversity and great books that you read about everything from being abled or whether you're LGBTQ or whether you have anxiety, just all these amazing topics that you can read about now as a young adult. So I think that's a lot of it for me.
Mhm.
And I think one of the biggest things, I struggled for years to try to get published and to get an agent to progress. I mean, one of the things I finally figured out was there's not a lot of emotional resonance. A lot of editors and agents were saying, I'm not connecting with this. I can't connect with the feelings. Adult literature often removes a lot of the emotion, and young adult is all about the emotion. It's all about the experience and the feelings. Once I figured that out, I started getting somewhere. And I started reading a lot more YA and realizing this is causing me to feel something. I'm connecting with it in a way that I don't with a lot of more removed adult literary fiction.
Mhm. Gotcha.
I wanted to add one thing because I
Sure.
remember, it's something David said sparked this in me. The other thing that I think is really cool about YA that I think you can't get a lot of other places is it is much easier to publish cross-genre fiction in YA because there's the young adult section, you know, sometimes it's separated out by fantasy, but yeah, so I think that's there's a certain subset of readers that is very served by that, right?
Right.
Whereas like an adult, like it has, you know, we're always asking, is this going to go on a science fiction shelf or is this going to
Right.
go on a mystery shelf, where we don't have to ask that question in YA.
I've
And it's
gotten
funny.
into,
Sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I get excited about this. It's also funny too, because to Sarah's point, you see a lot of publishers like sneak a book into the YA section. And I could name a few. It's like, this is not a YA book. They're just like, let's give it a more bright cover and make it a little more of a, you know, an illustrated cover and sneak that into YA. It's like, guys, this isn't a young adult book.
Yeah, I have gotten into the conversation on multiple occasions about whether or not YA is a genre or an audience. And so
It's not a genre.
it's not a genre. I absolutely agree. I always say YA, you have an adult audience, you have a YA audience. You have adult fantasy, adult romance, you have YA fantasy, YA romance. But so often you'd see it YA talked about as a genre, and it always like goes, makes me twitchy. It made me laugh when you said that it goes cross genre. I was like, yes, because it's not its own genre. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just laughing because I know when I first started, when I wrote Michaela's book, Voyage of the Defiance, my grandson, who was 10 at the time, asked me, he goes, Nana, will you please write a book that I, you know, so I can read it? So I wrote to him, you know, for a 10-year-old. The problem is that when I published it, he looked at me and he said, it's got a girl on the cover. So then I had to turn around and write another one geared for him that had a boy on the cover. And that's where the Dust series came out. But again, like you were saying, I was writing to that age, you know, for my 10-year-old grandson, a story that I wanted him to be able to connect with, that he wanted to read, that had that action and adventure in it, but also had a bit of a moral story to let him know that he was capable of anything that he wanted to be, you know, that he could relate to Dust and be anything that he wanted. And by doing this, you know, it goes across that genre. So I totally agree with, you know, what the other panelists have said.
Cool. The next question is kind of two-parted, so you can answer both parts, either or both. I would love to hear both parts. What is the thing that you like most about writing YA versus any other audience? And what is the thing that you like least? What is something you dislike about writing YA versus maybe another audience? So David's smirking down there, so I'm going to have David start. It looks like you have a thought.
I always have thoughts. I'm a very opinionated person. Sarah knows this because we know each other outside of here. But and Jennifer, I think you know that too. I always have thoughts on something, pretty much. I have written YA. I haven't published YA, so I have written adult fantasy and I've written YA fantasy. The thing that I liked the most about it was the characterization, that you can access a character's feelings, their perspective. I love the voice in YA because you're so much closer to them. It's a much more closer point of view. The thing that I found the hardest was honestly getting back into that mindset. I'm not a young adult and haven't been for a good while. So it was hard to try. I know, it was very hard to try to remember, what did it feel like to be 16? What did it feel like to be 18? And to think about that. I've been watching, and I smirked because I've been thinking about some YA authors I've been reading, and I've been watching them age up as they get older and still write YA, and go, I think you might be spending a little too much time in the teenager brain. You know, it can be hard to connect with. A very good friend of mine, Lisa Brown Roberts, writes YA romance, and her son graduated high school. She's like, darn, I've lost my spy.
Oh. Oh my God, that's great. Sarah, do you have some thoughts on that?
I mean, I feel like my favorite thing about writing YA is the kind of freedom that comes along with it, that you know, you can kind of just like write, you know, any genre. You can just like kind of go balls to the wall with the pacing and the plot, and just like, yeah, there's a lot of freedom in writing YA. compared to some other genres. So like romance, like for example, is like, I love writing romance, but also it's very structured, right? Like
Right.
you have to follow the structure and you have to follow conventions. And so I think I like YA for that reason. But then like, I mean, sometimes it's hard. And I think even like, so like as a literary agent, I see a lot of young adult come in my inbox that does not read like young adult. It reads like adults. And then you just slapped a 16-year-old name tag on them, you know? And I think that's the hardest thing about young adult is like actually writing teen characters is very difficult to do for adults.
Gotcha.
If I can ping off of that just a little bit to kind of do what Sarah did a minute ago, the age of your protagonist is not what makes your book adult or young adult.
Right.
Robin Hobb's Assassin's Apprentice, the boy's a teen. A lot of epic fantasy, the main character, it's an adult book with a teenage protagonist, right? The age of the hero or the heroine is not what determines the genre. And I think a lot of writers do make that mistake.
Gotcha. Susan?
I think one of the things that has been the most helpful for me was I was a school teacher, for 17 years, and I have 4 kids of my own, and I have 2 grandkids. One is 7 and the other one's just turned 17. So I have a lot of inspiration coming from, all of these different areas of having worked in the high school and worked with the elementary school and the middle school. The middle school is like totally different. They're a whole subspecies of themselves. It's like elementary, yeah, you can get them. High school, yeah, you can get them. That middle school area is kind of like that 3-year period. It's that gray area. And so, but it's really interesting being able to bring a lot of what I experienced being with them and having children of my own and watching my grandkids, and I took a lot from my grandkids and being able to take what they're going through, what they're feeling, and creating the characters based around them. Dust is very quiet. And so is my grandson. He's very quiet, but he's very intellectual. He's very reflective thinking. He looks at a situation and he tries to process it and think of it as a chess piece.
Right.
So I think being able to take, those kind of personalities and bring them into the situation. And, one of the things I've loved the most about writing the YA is not just knowing that I'm doing something for the younger kids, but when you have adults that come up to you and they grab you and they're shaking you and they're going, oh my God, when is the next book coming out? I cannot believe that I've fallen in love with a YA book. I don't read YA, and yet I'm so into your character. I cannot wait for the next book to come out. And, I get emails every day. When is the next one coming out? When is the next one coming out? And I think that is, just such a tremendous praise that books like that are timeless.
Right. Very cool.
And that's super cool.
Do you have anything that you don't like about writing YA? Anything that's hard for you about writing YA?
I think the hardest thing is convincing people to give it a chance. That has been one of the biggest things when I'm, at a convention. It's like, oh yeah, we're just coming for these books. And then they'll see the YA and they're like, I'm not so sure. But generally, once you can get through to them to give it a chance, then they fall in love with it and they're waiting for that next book to come out.
Gotcha. I know that this is not the case with all or even most YA, but it always makes me laugh whenever I see the meme going around about YA books and people asking, why are these kids doing these things and where are their parents? That kind of thing. So can you talk a little bit about the family units and the family structure in your YAs? How does that family role happen in your books? We'll start with Susan and go back.
Mine are based very much on my own experiences. Family is very, very important to me. In Dust's story, he loses his family, but there's a lot of reflective thoughts of the conversations that he had with his father. and his father's influence on the decisions that he makes now that he's alone.
Mhm.
And he brings this in to with the people that he meets. And so even though they're not blood relatives, he realizes that, you know, family doesn't have to be through blood. It can be through your own design,
Mhm.
and that it's what you make of it. And, you know, growing up, my kids, I had an open door policy. Literally, the door was always open and people were coming in and out. And, you know, kids would be raiding the refrigerator to see what leftovers I had. Or we would come home and all of our kids were in the car. And yet we had a full-fledged, you know, 10-person basketball game going on in our driveway.
Mhm.
So it was always that open door, loving relationship. And, you know, that doesn't mean that there's not areas where you don't have that conflict with broken homes and you know, abusive. As a school teacher, unfortunately, I did see children that were in abusive homes. And I'm, you know, at times I would have to be the one that contacted child services and say, I think this child's being abused, you know, because by law I had to do that. So it's bringing all of those experiences in, and it makes it more real.
Right.
When you know, when kids read it, they can relate to it. When adults read it, they can relate to it.
So the story, the family unit in your story, he doesn't have his true family. He's created like a found family.
Exactly. And
Cool.
you know, and in Michaela's, her biological father has died. Her mom's addicted to drugs, prescription medication, and she's meeting the estranged grandfather, which a lot of kids nowadays may not even know their grandparents.
Right.
And yet she's having to learn how to live with not only her grandfather, but learn she's got an uncle and an extended family.
Gotcha. Sarah?
Yeah, so my first YA book that came out, so my character worked for the US government. She was like a dragon shapeshifter for the US government. Her family had worked for them for 5 generations. In the course of the book, like at the very beginning, basically her parents are taken out of commission. They're basically put under government, what's the word? Not imprisonment, but
Supervision.
imprisonment would be a strong word.
Supervision.
Internment,
Under government.
They've been
supervision.
detained.
Yeah, they were temporarily detained. And so the second book that I have out, it takes place at a summer camp. So like, which is just like, it's a fun way to like get rid of the parents, because then you don't have to kill any parents or whatever. You don't have to break any families
Right.
up. They're just not there at that time. And so the book that is on submission right now with my agent is very much about family though. So family is a huge aspect of it. She lives with her sister and her dad, basically they didn't live with him for a long time, and their mother passed away, and then they lived with their grandmother for a long time, and their dad had to come back in the picture when the grandmother's health started failing. So it's very like, that's just part of the story, is the family dynamics.
Right.
And then the book that I'm working on right now, I am actually doing a lot with the family in that one. So it's about a girl from Miami, a queer girl from Miami who moves to a small town in Texas. Now I have to change some things. Thanks. And basically there's a queen bee kind of character, but like a nice one, like a nice queen bee. And she has a strong personality, right? And so she convinces the girl who moved from Miami to pretend to be her girlfriend for a school project. It's like a social experiment, obviously not knowing that the girl from Miami is queer. And so the girl from Miami has a very supportive family, just like whatever, is really supportive of her. The girl who is the queen bee girl is her dad's actually a politician, and so it creates a lot of like strife in the family when this experiment starts. And I'm like purposely kind of contrasting the family's reactions to this, And so that's been a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to play with because I think a lot of teens have, complicated or like stressful relationships with their parents.
Absolutely.
Even if they have good relationships, they still have, conflicts with them. And I think it's an important part of being a teen. It's probably at some point one of the most frustrating parts about being a teen, right?
Mhm.
And so I think it's fun to play with that, at least especially in contemporary settings.
Gotcha. David?
Well, as you probably know, in most YA fantasy, the parents are just get brutally murdered, usually off
Right.
screen.
Which is, I think
forever.
I think that's the inspiration for the meme. I think there were so many that happened.
Disney did it to us.
Did
Oh,
Disney
yeah.
do it? Is that who we have to go to?
Yeah.
Well, and an agent friend of mine a couple of years ago posted, she's like, man, every YA query I'm getting, it's like the first chapter is like 3 pages of how the parents were brutally tortured. And I think it's the Harry Potter thing, right? Harry Potter was still very large at the time, and if it ever does fade, but I think that influences. Let me start by showing you how horribly, terribly orphaned they were. So
Right.
when I wrote a YA fantasy, the first thing I did, I started the kid out as an orphan, and then slowly gave him his parents back, which I thought was very fun. So through the course of the book, he discovers his parents are still alive and gets to meet them and interact with them. There's a lot of complicated relationships there, which of course happens when you're a young person who's been estranged from your family. My family relationships were incredibly complicated and are. Adam's books absolutely reflects that. So I poured a ton of my own abusive upbringing and processing and work into Adam's books.
Right.
Which was kind of funny because that's one of the reasons they're not YA or I don't recommend them. I've had a couple of people like, I need a trigger warning for this. This isn't good for young adults. And I had to stop and think, but it's just my childhood. My first reaction was defensive. I was like, oh yeah, there is some pretty intense stuff there around child abuse and stuff. And that's really, really there. But I really like I try to keep the family around or bring the family back in because it is such an important part of our relationships. It's such an important part of who we are when we're young adults, and how to figure out. And I think why that trope or that cliche of the parents being brutally killed comes from is one of the first things you have to do as a young adult moving into new adulthood is figuring out how to separate yourself from your parent. Where does my mom end, my dad end, and where I begin?
Right.
And some books handle this so beautifully. Will Grayson. I love that the straight Will is like, I trust my parents. My parents have my best, and they have the best intentions for me, and I'll probably do what they want me to do with my life because I trust them. The other bitter gay Will, who I identify with a lot, love that character. He has a different relationship with his mom, and that's complicated. I'm just wrapping up a beautiful, difficult YA book, Bill Conensberg's The Music of What Happens. And it's about 2 boys falling in love while running a food truck to save the one boy's house from foreclosure. And the contrast that Bill manages with these 2 different characters and their family relationships is so perfect. And one of them is incredibly triggering to me. So I have to go, okay, I'll give it 3 chapters today and maybe 3 chapters next week. I can't sit down and just consume it the way I usually do Bill's books and other YA books. But I love that conversation is happening. So I think keeping the parents in the picture and keeping the family in the picture is so crucial. And I love when family relationships in YA can shift and grow. I think my favorite YA book is Date Me, Bryson Keller, and the family relationship with religion and the main character dealing with coming out and dealing with how the impact of that. I love what it had to say, and I love the way that the family relationship is discussed too. So I'll name drop great books at you all night if you let me. Shut up.
No problem. I am firmly in the camp of sharing good books. So you are absolutely, anytime you are on a panel and you have a suggestion for a book that applies, definitely you go back and put the book comment, put the book title and author in the comments. People will love that, for sure. Are there stories that you think are better told in a YA book than in an adult book, or do you think it just kind of it doesn't matter? You can, depending on how you want to approach it, you can tell it either way. Is there a story that you think is better told as a YA than any other audience? A type of story?
I do. You know, the coming of age, the dealing with discovering who you are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as a young teen myself, you know, I remember those struggles and seeing it in my own children, trying to identify who they are and what they're going to become and where their place is in this life,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in this world. And so I think, you know, in YA, you're able to capture all of those doubts and those insecurities that ring true to,
Right.
you know, that period of discovery, of discovering who we are and who our potential and who we're going to become.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, it looked like you had an answer.
Well, so I had an answer, but then every time I thought, except, so I feel like I have an answer, but they all have exceptions. So like, so coming of age, and so that made, like, that was one of the first things I thought of too. But then I don't know if anyone is aware, but we talk about, especially in queer spaces, about the second, what is it called? Second adolescence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because especially a lot of queer kids don't grow up in safe spaces where they can they can't become themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of them go through that in later in their life.
Right.
And so I wouldn't say that there is any story that maybe like that should always be told as a YA, but someone explained this to me a while back, and it just made so much sense, where you can tell the same story and it be a young adult book or it be an adult book, and the difference is the filtering. So if you're filtering it as though this is what the teenager is this is how the teenager is seeing this experience as a teenager, versus this is how an adult is looking back on their teenage years as a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
those are going to be told differently, and the things that
Right.
are going to be focused on and the themes are going to be different. And so to me, that's the main difference. And you could probably, if you're a talented enough writer, write any story in either,
Right.
but you just have to have the filtering right.
Gotcha. David, what do you think?
I thought it's so interesting because this is a really great conversation and a great question. I think about, does everybody remember the movie, or anybody remember the movie Never Been Kissed?
Yes.
Or did anybody watch Grey's Anatomy the first few years? There's an episode of Grey's Anatomy where all the adults have to throw a prom for a teenage girl played by Tessa Thompson, who's amazing, who's dying of cancer. And so they are the adult doctors in this very convoluted plot are tasked with throwing a prom. And of course, they're all acting like teenagers because they're all of their stuff comes out. And I think Never Been Kissed is a fantastic model of this, where sometimes to take an adult through some of the things that maybe they should have solved as a teen, they will inject them into a teenage scenario like prom. Or in Never Been Kissed, they send an adult reporter back to high school because she has a baby face, and she uses that as a vehicle to mature out of some of the stuff that she maybe should have solved as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
But which has some kind of problematic angles when she starts falling in love with the teacher. But but it's interesting because I love what Sarah said. Like I my first thought was first love, but at the same time, I've known people who didn't fall in love until they were in their 30s or 40s, or never really felt that until later. Coming out is another thing that I've known plenty of people who didn't come out until later in life. There's not. I think the key thing Sarah said that I really caught on was perspective or filtering. I had an editor say this to me once. I thought it was such a brilliant way of saying this. The difference between a YA perspective and an adult perspective is this. A young adult perspective is still very much me and still very centered on me. And which is why when you say to your teenager, why is the house such a mess? They're like, I didn't do it. It's not my fault. Like that's their first reaction because it's coming from an internal place. So when they go outside and it's cold, they might say, I'm cold, I need a sweater. Whereas an adult perspective is usually outward focused. It's not coming at it from that same internal place. And which is, I think, why YA has a stronger internal voice often and has a better emotive voice, because an adult person goes outside and says, oh, the trees are pretty with the snow and the icicles, and look at how the sun gleams on this the fresh snow, and oh, I should have brought a sweater. I'm cold.
Gotcha.
Right? It starts with an external perspective. I always thought that was a really smart way to put it, and I think it reflects well what Sarah was saying.
Gotcha. There was a question in the comments that refers back to something that David had mentioned, and I agree with what you said, but just maybe a little bit of extra clarification. What would you consider to be the age group for characters in a YA book, and why do you think that a YA as a YA book is not necessarily dependent on the age of your main character?
Well, part of it is I'm a little bit older myself. So young adult as a genre or as a age range, because it's not a genre, sorry, Sarah, didn't exist when I was a teenager, which meant I was reading adult fiction. There's been a meme going around about Gen X and the whole conversation about YA and what's appropriate. Like we would read V.C. Andrews and then flip right over to like Sweet Valley High. Like no.
Just as an FYI, the next question is going to be, what were some of your favorite books when you were a kid? So we'll come back to those in a minute.
I'll dig into the vault and let the others go first on that one.
Okay.
But I think it's very hard to have a young adult book with an adult protagonist. I should say that. A young adult book needs, and kids do read up. We tend to read up and older. Right. So I do, like when I was reading older, and I think most people do read up. So it's very hard to have a young adult book with an adult protagonist. However, an adult book can have a teen or YA protagonist.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. So in marketing terms, the target audience for young adult is 13 to 18, which it's weird to think about because it's such a wide range. Like if you think about a 13-year-old versus an 18-year-old is a lot.
Very different.
But
yeah.
David mentioned this, teen readers and children like to read 2 years older than them on average. And so when I say 13-year-olds are reading YA, they're wanting to read 15-year-olds. They're not wanting to read 13-year-olds. Which is why a 13-year-old protagonist is so hard to sell.
Right.
And yeah, so that's the answer. Like the target audience is 13 to 18. People read 2 years up, but past 19 is going to be very, very difficult because at that point they're adults.
Yeah, that's I would think anywhere from like 17, 18 up, anywhere where like graduation from high school and you're talking about getting, first entry level into your career job, or for, heading into college or getting your first apartment, all of that stuff I consider to be like new adult area right there.
And there are exceptions. Fangirl, for example, by Rainbow Rowell, which was very much sold as a YA book, even though she's starting college, but it deals with that strong YA theme of breaking away from home for the first time, separating from her father and dealing with her estranged mother issues and her twin who wants to be her own person.
Right.
So that's definitely, there are exceptions, but yeah, I think in general it comes down to, you don't see a lot of YA protagonists in college unless it is something like a magical school or a boarding school situation.
Gotcha. Susan, do you have anything to add to the aging of the characters in a YA?
Well, most of my YA characters are between 14 and 16.
Right.
And what they're doing is I start them at that age, and then each book they're like a year older.
Right.
So you're getting to grow with each book, you're growing with them. And you're seeing the changes in them and how they're growing and maturing. And I think that that's important because it leads the readers, in that age group to see, hey, I may be like this, but, I'm also going to be doing that change. I'm also going to be learning more. And as I learn more, it changes who I am and my perspective of both myself and the outside world.
Right. Very cool. All right, so I gave you guys a tiny bit of a heads up. Does anybody remember some of their favorite books from when they were in the YA age range themselves? Were
I
you
can name
reading?
3.
Okay, so here's a question. Were you reading YA books when you were a YA, or were you reading adult books when you were a YA?
YA as a marketing category didn't exist when any of us were in the YA category. There were YA books,
Right.
but YA was not a marketing category then.
Correct.
So yes. So we might have been reading some books that might be YA now, but maybe weren't YA then. Or they just was sort of as like kind of general kid lit, or I stopped reading most kid lit books around 12 years old, and I moved directly almost solely into adult science fiction and fantasy.
Very cool.
Which
Do you
makes a
remember
lot
what
of
your
sense.
favorite-
Like just adult science fiction and fantasy pacing, plotting is much more similar to YA than a lot of other genres. But I did have a little I don't want to call it regression. I did have a brief period of time when I was looking at going to college where I was reading everything that I could find about people going to college, which was not a large list. There were like 2 series mainly. It was Sweet Valley University and Freshman Dorm. And but that was just because like no one in my family had gone to college. I had no idea what to expect. I was like terrified. I'd only gone to small schools and I was going to a big school. So it was, and I think that's a really cool thing about like what YA does and why people read 2 years up, is because they're trying to figure out what's going to happen next, you know?
Right. Very cool. Do you remember any of those adult sci-fi fantasy ones that you read as a YA? Do you remember?
I mean, like I read every Mercedes Lackey. I don't remember a lot of them, to be honest.
Okay.
I also just have a terrible memory in general.
How about Susan or David? Do you guys remember what some of your favorite books were when you were in the YA age range? Susan?
The Secret Garden, The Black Stallion, The Forgotten Door. One of my favorites to read to my students was Maniac McGee. And these are all ones that I still go back and I read once a year, and I have ever since I was a young adult. I've gone back and I've read these stories over, like I said, probably 40 or 50 times. And each time it's funny because you pick up something that you missed before.
Very cool. David?
So my mom would not allow me to read any secular fiction, which meant that I could read the Bible and I could read anything that my mom really loved Christian romance, and she really loved Amish Christian romance particularly. I didn't read any of that. I didn't want to. But she had this weird nostalgic soft spot for Star Trek. And the thing that saved me and had me reading in high school and fiction beyond what I was assigned in class was the fact that I was allowed to read Star Trek novels. So when we could afford them, my mom or my grandmother would buy me a Star Trek novel, and I read dozens and dozens of Star Trek novels in high school. And that was that was really the only fiction I was allowed to read. I wasn't until I finally got to a point where I'm at a point now where I'm working and I have my own money, and I can start to branch out and going, and I'm a high school dropout because of, again, where and when I came from. I didn't finish high school, so I didn't have a big educational gap. So when I finally did get back to college and community college, I just began reading everything I could get my hands on when it came to classics or literary fiction. So at 18, I'm devouring all of Margaret Atwood's back catalog, which, like, my favorite book for about 10 years was her book Cat's Eye, which I don't think I will ever understand until I'm a middle-aged woman. And since I will never be a middle-aged woman, I'm never going to get that book entirely, but I still love it. It's beautiful. And I was reading Pat Conroy, The Prince of Tides, which is the first time I saw a family like mine reflected in fiction, and just cried and cried because I finally saw myself on the page. So my reading history is a little bit weird. And so I'm one of those adults now that when I can go back and read the young adult literature that's available to me, I'm so grateful that I can see a character like myself and I can read YA.
Right.
For example, I put in the chat, one of my favorite YA authors is Cale Dietrich. He just recently had a book come out with Sophie Gonzalez. And one of the things about Cale's fiction, the first time I picked up his first book, The Love Interest, and Cale's usually very high concept, like teenage spies have to save the world, or the sons of rival gangsters fall in love, like very high concept stuff. But he captures that teenage want, that teenage angst, the first time you see somebody that you are attracted to, and just that all of those feels that you have and all those feelings. And the first time I read Cale, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing, because that's that feeling, and it took me right back to being 16 and walking by the track field and seeing a guy and being like, and so Cale just does that better than anyone I know.
Very cool. Some of the comments that have come up recently, Delorianne says, I read some questionable fiction when I was a younger teen. I know that is true because she and I both read V.C. Andrews way before we should have been reading V.C. Andrews.
My sister was obsessed with V.C. Andrews at 17, which I think kind of messed her up a little bit.
I read a couple, and then I read the book Heaven, and it was the first book that ever made me cry, and I never read another V.C. Andrews books after that. Yeah, I was mad. I have been holding that grudge for a long time. Susan says, yay for Star Trek. Jody says she
Who was writing Star Trek back then? I meant to ask.
Oh
you.
man,
Was it Timothy Zahn?
A.C. Crispin. If you remember her from Writers Beware, A.C. Crispin wrote some amazing thoughts in a timeline that he brings into the thing. Vonda McIntyre, who unfortunately we lost about 15 years ago to cancer, she went on to win an incredible award for her non-Star Trek work. Greg Bear, who you may know from sci-fi at a different level. A lot of really great sci-fi writers got started in Star Trek. Greg Bear wrote a hysterical Star Trek book or two along the way. I think we just lost him about a year ago too. I'm very grateful to be friends with David Mack, who after he's been writing Star Trek novelizations for a long time now, about 20 years, and he wrote some DS9 episodes. Fantastic, cool guy. And I have the privilege that he just named a character in his most recent Star Trek book after me, which
I saw that.
Blows my damn mind, just frankly. So yeah, start go back. If you look at people who were writing Star Trek novels back then, you'll see this like, oh wow, that person. And of course a lot of them too were people like DC Fontana, who had written episodes for the original series, so they knew their characters and stuff well. I will stop babbling about this because if you let me, I'll go on.
No, you're good. You're good. We are hitting about the end of our time. I've got time for one more question. So I know there was one more that I was going to ask, and now I don't remember what it was. I think I got them all, actually. Yep, I got all my questions. So we're good. One of the comments in the chat, though, actually a couple of people have said that they're above the age of YA. They're older, and so they really didn't think that they would connect with YA books, but that they have in some circumstances. So looks like YA is cracking through some of those potentially wouldn't pick it up. They wouldn't pick it up, and now they do. So that's a good thing.
Over 50% of YA readers are adults.
Yes, absolutely. I believe that 100%.
That's what I'm saying. When I have readers that come up to me at a convention and they grab you and they're shaking you and they're like, oh my God, I'm addicted to this series now. And I don't read YA. And, getting people to understand that you're not writing about just kids. You're writing, it's like the Harry Potter series, bringing that up. It's not just for kids. It's situations that they're dealing with and things that they can relate to.
Gotcha.
I have people all the time say, oh, well, XYZ, and I know you can't do that in YA. And I'm like, yeah, you can. People all the time are like, I know you can't do that in YA. And I'm like, when's the last time you read a YA book?
Right. Right.
A lot of people have conceptions about them that are just not accurate.
Have any of you read Dorinda Jones' Bad Day for Sunshine?
No, I didn't read that one.
Really, really amazing adult romance, not paranormal shit like her Charlie Davidson stuff. But one of the things she's done so fascinating is there's 2 points of view, the mother and the daughter. And I bring this up because it bridges the adult and YA perspectives through these 2 points of view in a way I've never seen so deftly done. You can tell that she's written both. I was very impressed with how she's handling that two-voice switch.
Very cool.
Before we
Right,
another
go,
book to
I just
add.
wanted to say that David's books are amazing and everyone should read them. And I can't wait to read if he writes YA.
That is a true statement, and I agree 100%. What were you going to say,
This
Susan?
t-shirt's a hint. I have a YA fantasy called Ghost Dragon that I have not yet sold, but
Alright.
just I wore, since we're talking YA tonight, I wore it. So knock on wood, Ghost Dragon will get out there in the world for too long.
I don't know if you realize, but the camera just shook because I knocked, and then I remembered that my camera was on the thing, so that's why there was a little knock. Well, it sounded like you were going to say something, Susan. Did you have something to add?
Oh, I was just going to have him put the name of the book by Dorinda Jones in the chat.
Yeah. And I love her. I love her stuff. I love Dorinda Jones, but
Yes.
it is adult, so there is some sexiness. Just warn you, if you're like, don't buy this for your 10-year-old.
Have you seen half of the video games that the kids play nowadays?
I play those. I play those video games. Trust me.
All right, so I think we need to make sure each of you gets a chance to tell people what you have had come out recently, what you may have coming out later this year, any place you might be making any appearances, and where people can find out more about you and your books online, social media or websites or whatnot. Susan, why don't we start with you?
Well, if people are interested, they can go to SESmithFL@gmail or .com, and then they can email me at SESmithFL@gmail.com if they're interested. But I have a lot of books coming out. I have over 200 books at the moment. So there's always new stories coming out. This year is going to be a little bit iffy about where else I'm going to be attending.
Gotcha.
I am going to be starting the Appalachian Trail in March 23rd. So I will be on the trip for 6 to 7 months.
Good luck. Sarah or David, who wants to go next?
Sarah, go first.
Sarah, go first.
Yeah, you can find me at sarahnicholas.com. That's Sarah with an H, Nicholas, no H. I will be at Left Coast Crime in Albuquerque in April. So I'm really looking forward to that. I should be at Bucks County Book Festival in September. Those are the ones that I know of for sure. I'll be there as a literary agent, so I'll be teaching classes and taking pitches there. And yeah, and just I think I mentioned this earlier in another panel, but on Wednesday nights, if you are free at 8 p.m. Eastern, we do a virtual write-in every Wednesday, and I invite everyone to join us. You don't have to be a writer. Jen comes and does blogging stuff. Laura comes and does editing stuff. So if you have any kind of work that is useful to do in 20-minute sprints, I hope you will join us.
Cool beans. David?
So the best place to find me is just davidslayton.com. If you're looking for me, all my social media handles are there. And if you're looking for me on social media, I'm the most active on Twitter. I'll be dropping a ton of book news in the next 3 days. A lot of stuff should be out on Monday, Tuesday, and then we're doing the cover reveal for Deadbeat Druid on Thursday.
Nice.
So with the Nerd Daily. So
Very cool.
I have 4 book announcements to tell you about next week, and so look for me online to find out all about that. And you can find I'll post them everywhere because I obviously have a big mouth, and you'll see them on Facebook and Instagram.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for watching and asking questions and making your comments. I appreciate your interaction. Thank you to my lovely author friends for spending your time this evening with us. it is a Saturday night after all, and you're sitting there in your little computer boxes talking to me. So I do appreciate.
I'm at the beach.
Oh, that's true.
Out in
That's true. I
space.
forgot. Sarah's at the beach.
I'm in my dungeon. My roving dungeon.
Well, I think everybody's right where they need to be right this moment, and I appreciate your time and I appreciate your conversation. And we have one last panel tonight for the Coastal Magic Convention 2022 virtual event. We are actually going to get to talk to some friends and family of some of our featured authors and hear from their perspective what it's like living with a featured author. So that's going to be fun. We've done it at the convention before, and it was really a fun panel. We've only done it once, so tonight's going to be the second time we've done it. So I'm looking forward to some fun conversation there. And then we have about a half a day's worth of programming tomorrow, so definitely check it out. You can find out what else is happening on the Coastal Magic Convention.com website, and you can also check on the social media. It gets posted there as well. And if you are not a Facebook fan, you can see replays as they are uploaded to YouTube. It's a little bit slower trying to get them over there, but that is an option as well. So again, thank you very much for your time, and we will catch you maybe later tonight or tomorrow. Have a good night, all.
Good night. Good night, Sarah. Good night, David. Good night,
Bye.
Jennifer.